panelists 10 minutes to speak about the film and the issues related to it. And then we'll open the floor to some questions from the audience. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Lydia Ward, who was a collaborator on the film and is a foreign affairs analyst with the Toronto Star. And she'll be our first speaker. In the center is Professor Arn Sundar, who's in the Department of Politics and Public Administration here at Ryerson University. And our final panelist is Roma Wekesa, who is the Executive Director of the Human Rights League of the Horn of Africa. He's been working since the early 90s to eradicate human rights abuses in Ethiopia. He came to Canada in 2002, where he continues to do his work in the area of human rights. So, Olivia, if you'd like to open, that would be great. Now, there's a mic there. Great. Okay.
And I don't know how this sounds, so if you can't hear, just wave. Okay, great. Now, this film really came about because both Shelley and I had spent some time in war zones, and Shelley particularly in Bosnia, and I in the former Soviet Union, the Middle East, Iraq, just the Balkans, what was left of the Northern Ireland troubles, etc., etc. But one thing that we both felt all of these conflicts had in common was that there were enormous numbers of weapons that were used, and not just on government sides, but also on rebel sides, and also on the sides of militias who were being used by the government. And weapons, particularly illicit weapons, are used to kill literally millions of people, as you all know, and particularly from seeing this film. But both Shelley and I felt very strongly about this, and we had talked for some time about making the film. The only thing that held us back was really the size of the subject, because there was hardly any conflict-ridden country that was not involved in this trade. And it was just a huge, sprawling subject. And when we started this off, we were really not sure from our own experience whether there was any link between these countries or whether they were all separate issues and, perhaps had separate causes. But as we began to work on the film, the more we did, the more we realized that they had so many things in common. We also found that they had one person in particular in common, who of course is mentioned in the film, Victor Bout. And Victor is now cooling his heels in New York, and not in a good way. He's behind bars. And he was actually the one-stop shop for a lot of what went on, particularly in Africa, but also in other countries, because he was very clever. I mean, he not only he didn't stop at small-time arms trading, as some people do in various regions. He actually founded a kind of enterprise, a multinational corporation, where he had his own pilots, he had his own shippers, he had his own contacts, and occasionally, but not that often, he would actually go and make arms deals himself. But the upshot of all that was that hundreds of thousands of tons of weapons were shipped around the world through this kind of corporation, and people died at the other end, certainly as you've seen in the film. And so he became, if not a character, at least a symbol. And in fact, at the time that we made the film, we had no idea that Victor Bout would actually be caught himself in a sting operation that really was based on drugs, and sort of arms for drugs deal, and something that he was tricked into, which is pretty extraordinary because he was a very cagey guy. But, these things happen, and so the whole picture of the arms trade, though, has not been altered, in spite of the fact that we don't know anybody who did this kind of arms dealing on the scale that he did. But over the last couple of years, new elements have entered into the arms dealing the arms trade. And one of them is that countries and militias and groups and sort of split off groups in various countries have become very good at making their own weapons. And so they will often create hybrid weapons and put them together themselves, and if you like, eliminate the middleman. So the trade goes on. It certainly hasn't slowed down, and just by trying to trace where the weapons came from and how they got there is a very important part of tracking how this develops, and also how it might possibly be cut down, as the United Nations is trying to do with their treaty on small arms. But we can probably talk more about that later. So I'll hand over the microphone to our other two panelists.
Well, I'd just like to start by thanking Olivia Chino and the Aegis students here at Ryerson for organizing this, along with, actually I realized that that's not good enough, for the Canadian Centre for International Justice. So thank you for organizing and putting on this really excellent film, really educational and eye-opening. And also thank you for inviting me to say a few words. The film already provides a lot of valuable information, so I won't repeat all of it. And I'm certainly not as closely associated with these issues as Olivia clearly has been. So I thought I'll just kind of do my little professorial bit and provide some background facts and figures about the arms trade. The first thing that I just wanted to sort of do is define a little bit more broadly what the arms trade refers to, and then the relevance of that will become clear. But usually they're referred to as small arms and light weapons as a category, and all the treaties that are seeking to address them sort of look at both of these. And so small arms includes pistols, revolvers, sporting rifles, sporting shotguns, military firearms, such as we saw with the Kalashnikovs or AK-47s. And then there's things like light weapons, which includes mortar systems, handheld grenade launchers, recoilless guns, portable rocket launchers, and so on. So there's actually quite a wide range of different kinds of weapons technologies that are classified as small arms or light weapons. And although the focus of the film was on the AKs to a large extent, and as the film made clear that those are definitely the most popular weapons, there's also this whole other range to think about when thinking about what flows across in terms of the arms trade. One of the things that has happened since the Cold War ended, since the early 90s, was sort of a focus more on these kinds of weapons, because there's a recognition that a lot of the smaller wars that followed the end of the Cold War were really being fought with the use of these kinds of weapons. So we could see here concerns around the relationship between these weapons and criminality, but also the whole question of development and poverty and the relationship with these kinds of weapons and how they get employed in that respect in cases of a breakdown of the state or lack of development or increased poverty. But I think what I'd just like to do is raise a couple of questions that we might want to think about in terms of how we can think about regulating this kind of trade or how we can address it. And the first question is there's definitely been a kind of international movement to try and regulate them. There have been different steps at the UN. Most recently, earlier this summer in July, there was a big meeting at the UN for the Arms Trade Treaty. But whether we can think about it in exactly the same terms, there's been weapons of mass destruction, there's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, there's treaties banning chemical and biological weapons, and then more successfully, a sort of model that a lot of small arms, anti-small arms groups try to use as their model is the International Landmines Network that successfully got landmines banned in '97. But I guess one would have to think about whether one can apply the same kinds of frameworks to something like these kinds of weapons, because while you can find some kind of larger argument for nuclear weapons having kind of destructive outcomes for generations to come, and we can see that these do as well. They're also the main kind of arms that states use, so that you can't actually talk of an outright ban, you can only talk about regulating them in different ways. So they are somewhat different. The other thing is whether we're focusing on the illicit trade, the illegal trade of them, or the arms trade more generally. And one of the things that the film focuses very much on the sort of gray area, and these people like Boot, who are doing the illegal trading, or who are operating in these gray zones. But one of the sort of facts that we don't often realize is that the trade, the sort of legal trade in small arms, the authorized trade, is actually significantly larger, and it's something like the figures show that we have something like 8.5 billion US dollars is the amount, the annual value of authorized international transfer of all kinds of small arms like weapons, parts, accessories, and ammunition. The documented amounts is something like 8.5 billion US dollars annually. And this includes, of course, as I said, all of these things: ammunition, accessories, parts, etc. And in 2009, the top exporters of all of these things, according to available customs data, were in descending order: the United States, Italy, Germany, Brazil, Austria, Japan, Switzerland, the Russian Federation, France, South Korea, Belgium, and Spain. And the top importers of these were, again in descending order, the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Canada, Germany, and France. So it's actually big trade, and you carried out also between sort of the bigger countries of the global north. So it's sort of important also to think about how important this trade is to our economies, how central it is to industrial economies as well, and how much is actually at the heart of how much sort of value is generated. And I'm not saying it in a sort of value, just profit, not social value. So one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about this and seeing clips from this film, I hadn't seen the film itself before, but when you think about the close association of the modern small arms trade to early capitalist expansion colonialism, if you go back to the history of how a lot of colonial expansion began 500 years ago, and began also with the exchange of guns for other kinds of goods, whether it was slaves or furs or food and so on, so that there's almost a kind of historical association of particular kinds of economic development with the exchange of guns. And also you can think about what that means is the exchange of means of destroying life in exchange for the means of producing, sustaining, and nourishing life. So you're exchanging guns for people who will do the work of production for you. So really, one might want to think about the whole trade more broadly in terms of how central it is to our economy and how we can address that. And for, part of that is that illicit gray area that needs to be regulated, but it's not really the whole story in a sense. And I guess the final question that I would have, the final point I want to make is about the level at which, if you do want to think about regulating them, what are the different levels at which this can be done? So there's obviously national frameworks, and the argument that John Bolton's making at the end, the US ambassador to the UN, is that the difficulty that the US faces in signing on to the International Arms Trade Treaty is that there's concerns domestically within the United States from the National Rifle Association and such groups that it would in some ways then require greater regulation and registration and tracing within the United States itself, and that violates the amendment right to hold guns. But we've seen a similar kinds of moves in Canada as well, with the whole discussion around the gun registry. So there's that, and so many other states also would have similar kinds of objections. And even though the US was the strongest objector in terms of the Arms Trade Treaty, other countries also are concerned about what it means to talk about regulating the arms trade because of who is doing the regulating, what kinds of domestic kinds of constraints will it require, and what are the kinds of terms and conditions. So the Arms Trade Treaty, essentially, previous to this, there was something called the program, or there continues to be something called the program of action, which is really aimed at regulating illicit trade. But this new Arms Trade Treaty is also about trying to improve and create international standards for the authorized trade in small arms and light weapons, so better registration, documentation, licensing, traceability, but also things like tying it, so arms embargoes in states that are considered to be human rights violators, and those are some of the kinds of things that this treaty attempts to do. But then the question that raises is, who defines who's the arms violator? What happens when you have authorized trade to states that are themselves violators, but the trade is not permitted to groups that are resisting those states because they're considered terrorists in some fashion. And so it does become the question of arms and access to these kinds of arms can get kind of tied into sort of political questions of who has access to them and why should only certain states have access to them and why shouldn't smaller groups have access to them as well. So one can think about the sort of larger politics of what's involved in trying to regulate them. And finally, of course, just something that came out of the film, and I think Joanne mentioned that she was listening to this news story about the sort of flow of arms within Tripoli right now in Lebanon that's coming in, around the conflict in Syria and so on. So again, recognizing that a lot of the flows are not, they may be carried out by some slightly shady or very shady characters, but a lot of the flows are often justified in these times of war as being necessary to support one party or the other. So, the whole Cold War justification for why we found all these arms in Afghanistan, why they continue to be used after 2000, and why we see Kalashnikovs being taken by Americans to Afghanistan. So again, maybe the focus can be on the arms trade, but it's also on the larger kind of political frameworks that justify their usage at different points. And maybe want to talk about that.
First of all, I want to say thank you for organizing such a type of meeting. It is very important meeting, of course, especially for me, because I got an opportunity to say something on from the angle of human rights abuse by such type of weapons in Horn of Africa, especially. So I want to say something. Is the audience should recognize this film. It is a real. It is not creation. Really, it is a real. It is what's happening there, because physically I have been there and I saw what is happening on the ground. So I want to stress some factors how these weapons are redistributed in the whole of Africa, especially not on, even on all over Africa. And my point is how the treat of small armies and the light weapons in the whole of Africa, how many of these weapons are in circulation today, only in the whole of Africa, and who are impacted by the spread of these firearms, who are impacted or who are victimized, and what we can do as the end, what I'm going to see, what can we do, especially people who are neutral from weapon or armed traders. What should we do? This is what I'm going to see. What of firearms or small arms? What the definition of small arms? You already gave us a clue that is really the fact that is happening here. So what I want to see is where is these guns come from? As we see from the film, the gun traders or producers are the Westerners, especially USA. There are around 70 countries who are producing, more than 70 countries. And these countries are importing legally or saying that registered firearms, they are importing them. But these illicit imported guns, when they reach there in Africa, especially in the Horn of Africa, as you saw, it is completely changed into illicit. That means illegal weapon, because the soldiers themselves, they are selling the guns. So in any ways, there in the Horn of Africa, the gun buying is as here we are buying, we are going to the shop and buy eggs or any item. It is like that. So it is uncontrolled. For example, in Canada, we have, of course, we know that legally people can have small weapons or pistol. It is registered, it's regulated. The government knows who has or who doesn't have. So it is not very tough to identify if the crime is happening in Canada or in Toronto. But there is no way we can trace such type of weapons. So most of the small weapons are very, what we are talking about the weapons is now those which are just sold on black markets, Why they are available on black markets in the whole of Africa, these small weapons, because they are easily can be handled or can be carried, they are very light. So children of age 10 or even 7 can carry them, they use them. Even though they don't know how to use them, they can really play with them as a toy if children are playing in Canada or in America. So the most important thing is, especially Human Rights Watch last maybe 2 years ago registered that there is a war in Burundi in between the government and the opposition groups. So they identified that these guns, the small guns, both directions are using, most of them are illicit. That means they are not really registered guns. So in any ways, it is really very, very difficult to control or to register such type of guns or firearms in the whole of Africa, especially only in African regions. So for decades, for example, if you see in the whole of Africa, people are starving. Children are starving. But the government of whole of Africa or in general, and Africans are buying in billions dollars, paying for this, buying these small arms. And after buying these small arms, they cannot control them. It is everywhere. It is everywhere. So who are impacted? I say who are impacted by the spread of these guns. The most victims are civilians, especially children and women. Because when there are two groups are fighting, they can be captured in between these two groups, and they are the most victims. And the second one is political dissidents or opposition groups. For example, the government is buying small arms and give to the soldiers or their members. So if somebody wants to say something or speak, especially journalists, if we say journalists or human rights activists or opposition groups, if they can, because they speak, they can be killed. They can be killed. So these are the victims, and the other victims are the target activists, union leaders, and the journalists. Union leaders, when we are talking about union leaders, for example, if you have got an association, let's say Teachers Association or Journalists Association, no union leader can speak on behalf of the organization to the government, opposing the government. So they are completely targeted people. So journalists are the most targeted personals in the whole of Africa. For example, if we see in the Somalia, in the last 20 years, 47 journalists were killed. 47, that means every year, almost 2 journalists are just killed, means. So for example, let me see, the last guy who was killed, he was on October 23, that means this month. So his name is Ahmed, he was 25 years old, and he was killed in Somalia, and he's a correspondent for the private London-based Universal TV. So that means journalists are the most victims in the whole of Africa, especially in Somalia, not only in Somalia, in Ethiopia or in Eritrea, everywhere. So journalists are, for example, if we see in Eritrea, there are around 20 journalists in prison. Why they are in prison? because they speak their mind. They wrote something that's supporting the government. So if these journalists are outside, they have a chance to be killed. The same thing is in Ethiopia. I was a journalist when I was in Ethiopia. So I was just charged without any charge. I was jailed for 4 years and come out from that prison and came here. I'm really lucky to be here. Why? Because here is more safe and we can speak what we want to speak. We can just speak our mind. So this is the most difficult part of the country, the world, especially Horn of Africa, is the most difficult of the world. So lastly, what is the solution? We saw that we saw from the film that the countries who are selling mostly are the USA, France, England, Canada, and the others. These organizations, these countries are the superpower countries. Or we can say that if you see in the United Nations tried many times to regulate these firearms, but they couldn't. Why? Because the superpower they are the sellers. They are sellers. So what I want to suggest is the only way we can really talk about this or organize disseminating these armies to Africa or anywhere is the civilians. The civilians should come together. People, normal people, the individuals have to come to and push on these countries. So otherwise, it will continue, and more disaster is going to get into Africa, especially. Thank you for listening.
Any questions?
For Olivia, what are some of the challenges that you faced while fighting against the aspect of it?
Right, well, as I said, the scroll was bad, but also developing contacts was extraordinarily hard. And Shelley and I made several pictures together, but this was really the hardest. And one of the things that was strange about it was that there were a number of people, particularly in Africa, who had worked with monitoring weapons, small arms and illicit arms. And when we contacted them, they were quite good. They agreed to talk to us. We had long exchanges of emails and conversations on phones and things. But the very strange thing was when we sort of tied them down to a date and said, well, we want to arrive with our crew on such and such a date, there was no answer. And this happened not just once, it happened repeatedly. So I don't know whether it's because the people in the sort of masterminds of the gun trade are so powerful or have so many tentacles in so many communities that people are quite afraid, or whether they didn't want to jeopardize their positions with various groups that they were working for. But it was a huge barrier for us, and so really a lot of 2 years we spent developing contacts. The pilots, for instance, actually Shelley located them on the internet. One of them had posted a sort of YouTube video of him flying a plane. It didn't show what he was carrying, but he was flying a plane in very strange parts of Africa. And then you saw one clip where I think a plane flew up, and she thought, this is odd. So she managed to get in touch with him, and then finally he just said, yeah, okay. So he agreed to be part of the film. And so it went, but it was really like trying to build a house with sticks in a high wind. Any other?
Yeah, this is for anybody that wants to answer, but I was just wondering more or less that to me the issue kind of stems from the countries that are producing these weapons, and I understand they want to make a profit, but at the same time, are they admitting at all to basically being involved in any way in the deaths of so many civilians? Because they are indirectly there for justice, they are there for all these kind of things, and yet look at the justice that they serve to, humanity.
Well, I mean, I'll just.
If you read
let
like
everybody
all of
else,
that,
let everybody else
Yeah,
answer. I mean, just all I can say is that in my experience confronting politicians about these issues, it's like a stone wall. You know, they will, well, our policy is this and that and everything, and our policy is perfectly good, and everybody says so in our government. End of story. So that's pretty much it. But I'll hand this over to everyone else because they do have other issues.
Well, I think a film like this is one step towards, making governments more responsible, because it does sort of put it in their face, or put it in the face of the public who might then do something about it. Because aside from the fact of how many people get killed, there's also the really interesting documentation of where who's taking the guns from where. I thought that whole Bosnia story was really interesting because governments claim to have ideological reasons for fighting wars, and they claim to be fighting them for X or Y reason and against so and so, and then in the end when it comes to actually getting the arms, they don't really care where they come from, and they don't really care who they give them to. So it sort of exposes this so-called high moral stance that governments take in public. And so I think a film like this is a good, it's a very important step, and obviously we need many more such attempts at documenting and making people aware, because I think unless people are also more aware, governments aren't going to be called to be more accountable.
Yeah, just to add some, governments who are selling the small armies are not believing that they are selling illegal. They are selling exactly what they are saying is, especially from USA, they are saying that the arms which are just exporting to Africa are just registered arms. That is the duty or the responsibility of those countries who bought the arms to control within their country. Because the main thing is, from here, as we saw, the black marketers are not really legal for the exporters. They are simply dealing with the producers. So what they are saying, this question was asked many times. They are saying that it is not our responsibility. They bought the arms, they have to regulate it, they have to control it, is what they are saying.
In the end, there must be enough evidence, though, that they cannot deny it, regardless of whether they blame others. There must be enough evidence, and I would assume that there is enough evidence even right now to go up to them and say, look, speak about this now, let's have a conference, and let's speak about this to the people, and get like panels. How can we start these panels? How can we get these politicians to come sit down? I know they're not willing to initially, or it's very hard to get them to, but there are some politicians that will, depending on which side of the spectrum they sit on or whatever their values are. Get these people start doing these things, but how hard would it be to get it, big enough to change?
Well, I think when you're talking about the United States, it's a huge problem, as I'm sure you know. On the Republican side, and we don't know exactly how big that is going to be at this moment, but you can bet that if Romney gets in, that it'll be a complete end to any kind of dialogue on controlling arms of almost any type. Even if Romney doesn't get in, things at the moment are very little better. It's naked power politics. They know that in the United States, if you mention the word guns in the same sentence as control, that you're talking votes, or so they see it. And so it's to my mind, just horrifically cynical. It's really awful. And it's done very cold-bloodedly, and I think partly because a lot of the people who are doing it have never seen anybody die from these weapons.
I would add that Americans have very little respect for what they call aliens. That's anything that's not like me. When
I mean, an outright ban will inconvenience the hunter, will inconvenience the sport shooter. But will it really curb the problem in that subject if people are going to make it themselves, volatile firearms? Maybe it's the attitude we need to focus on, not the actual item.
I mean, that's a very good example because an outright ban, as I was trying to say before, is, are we saying ban all weapons owned by states and by all individuals? I mean, sort of so completely demilitarized, in which case, yes, you know, I think that would be a grand goal to work towards. But if we're only wanting to ban, we have to think about what it means to ban even small arms trade to non-state actors, because if states can have complete access to these legally, you know, you have states, the Sri Lankan state and what it did in the north of Sri Lanka, the Indian state and what it's doing in Kashmir or the northeast. So even not in situations where states are seen to have failed, in quotes, as in Somalia, but places where states are extremely strong and have all full legal authorized access to not just small arms but big arms, heavy arms. What happens in those situations to people who want to resist the state in some fashion? So I just want to leave that question open. And then there's also the point about the United States. I mean, this is big business, or it's small business when you compare it to what's called the revolution in military affairs. All the new technology that goes into new weapons of different kinds, the drones, you know, to name the biggest problem, sort of a big problem at this point. So I mean, we can focus on these, but we also have to remember who has the edge if you completely ban these kinds of weapons and you don't have who's going to shoot the drone. You know, how do you're not going to see your Pakistani fighters or whoever getting drones anytime soon. So the only way that they're going to have to respond to an invasion into their space and killing of civilians is the occasional Kalashnikov. So, you know, I think we have to look at these arms also within the bigger picture of where the real money is being spent, what the new weapons technology is, and how these are balanced against those.
I went back to East Africa for the first time in 20 years, just last month, and for me it was interesting to see, because you learn a lot of the issues that are happening in Africa in theory and through books, and it was interesting to kind of go back for the first time and see things in reality, and I agree, a lot of the people think that when they see videos like this or documentaries, it's something that's staged so that you get a reaction out of people, but people don't realize that this is the reality that people live. And at times it's a lot worse than what you see in the documentary because people are afraid. And I mean, we go back and we try and get a story out of these people, but what we don't understand is we get to go back to our homes. But they're the ones that are stuck in that situation. And once you expose yourself and once you put yourself out there to speak about the atrocities or what the government is doing, I mean, you're putting their life at risk. And it's not only their lives, it's their siblings, it's their family, extended family, it's everybody around them. So, I mean, for me, I think that was the hardest thing for me to see when I went back to Africa. But, I mean, putting together a gun regulation, I think is going to be really, it's something that's going to be difficult. And I agree with the gentleman at the back that I think it's a change of mentality. And when you look at a lot of the issues in Africa, you realize a lot of it stems from poverty. These people are poor. They've got nothing to lose. So to pick up a gun and to rob a person, to them, they're not thinking, I'm robbing an innocent person who has nothing. They're thinking, it's my life. It's the only way I can save my children or my family. And for us, we don't understand it, and I could never comprehend how someone can pull up a gun and kill an innocent person. But to them, it's a justified war. So I think it's tackling the issue of poverty. It's finding solutions to give them jobs, employment, so making their economy a bit more stable, and tackling the issue of women's issues, because I think in war and in poverty, it's always the women and the children that suffer the most. And I mean, until you go there, you don't really realize the impact of it.
No, I really am that every war I've been to, as soon as the war is over, the first thing that people ask for after they've been fed and their medical needs have been attended to is jobs. And particularly the fighters, as you know, when people come back from fighting for months or for years, they say, well, what have I been fighting for? You know, if they're on the winning side, they'll say, well, what have I won? And all they have is their expertise with guns. And a lot of people would be willing to give their guns up. As you know, it's not just a question of sending a cart around and even paying them a bit of money, which will be gone, you know, after a certain time, but to give people actual jobs and to make them feel that they're taking part in the development of their communities, if not their country. But unfortunately, the planning is so bad that when wars end, the rest of the world might be even prepared to help, for instance, as they did with Libya. But that isn't good enough. You know, you have to have plan B. You have to be able to jump in. And even at a very low level of community development, it doesn't have to be mega projects, but there are lots of projects that people in those countries, as you know, are very intelligent, and they have lots of ideas about things that they can do, but there is no investment, and interest dies very, very quickly, and that's when the funds come.
We have time for one last question. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This has been great. And thank you, everyone, for coming. If you want any additional information about CCIJ, there's some literature on the table on the way out. And we are running 2 other film nights, one on November the 29th at U of T, which is Rain, Shouting in the Dark, and one on January the 24th at York University, which will be Granito. So if you're interested, there's information on our blog, which is, as I slightly hesitate, CCIJ Toronto at WordPress. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks so much.